It started as a fairy tale rebellion, the prince and his bride walking away from the most powerful monarchy on earth. They weren't just leaving titles behind, they were rejecting tradition, breaking with centuries of protocol, and saying they'd survive without the crown's checkbook. And at first, the world leaned in. Meghan and Harry's sit-down with Oprah felt raw, urgent, human. They spoke of being cut off, blindsided, financially abandoned. Meghan claimed she had to reach out to old industry friends just to stay afloat. Harry said his only fallback was the money left behind by his mother. The audience bought it. Two people stepping out of the palace shadows to build a life from scratch. No staff, no security, just each other. It had all the elements of a modern underdog story. But then something strange happened. They didn't just survive, they flourished, and fast. Deals worth tens of millions came crashing in. Magazine covers, podcast exclusives, a Netflix docuseries, a memoir that cracked family silence wide open. It didn't look like survival anymore. It looked like a business, carefully branded and aggressively monetized. And now, people are starting to ask the question that's been sitting quietly under the surface for years. If they were truly cut off, then where is all this money coming from? They built the brand, but now the headlines are burning, and there's no clean way out. Back in 2021, that now infamous Oprah interview dropped like a bomb. In it, Harry stated plainly that the royal family had literally cut him off. Meghan nodded solemnly, adding that she had to lean on past Hollywood contacts just to find gigs and keep things afloat. It painted a stark image: two people, stripped of royal privilege, scraping together a new start in California. The story resonated. Public opinion swung hard in their favor. For a moment, it really did seem like they had left the palace behind and stepped into the wild with nothing but courage and love. That narrative was gold. It sold books, interviews, and headlines. But that's where the cracks began to show. Because while Meghan was talking about hardship, the couple was already living in a sprawling Montecito mansion with manicured gardens, private security teams, and interiors that looked like a Vogue shoot. That home alone? Reportedly worth over $14 million. Not long after came private flights, high fashion, elite bodyguards, and major renovations that screamed big money comfort, not survival. Suddenly, people started doing the math. If the crown truly cut them off and Harry's trust fund wasn't enough to support this level of extravagance, then how did they scale up so fast? This wasn't the lifestyle of someone rebuilding, it was the lifestyle of someone cashing in. And here's where the public mood shifted. The sympathy that once protected them started to melt into suspicion. People weren't rooting for rebels anymore. They were watching the rise of something entirely different, a royal brand that didn't walk away from the system. It simply rebranded and monetized it for American media. Here's where things go from curious to suspicious. Within months of stepping back from royal duties, Meghan and Harry's calendar filled up with contracts that most seasoned celebrities take decades to land. First came the Netflix deal, reported to be worth anywhere from $50 to $100 million, though the actual numbers remain sealed. Then came Spotify, where they inked an exclusive podcast arrangement with a rumored 8-figure payout. Next, Harry's memoir. A tell-all that didn't just stir controversy, it detonated everything from palace protocol to private family moments. That one alone? Estimated to bring in upwards of $20 million in advances and royalties. Add to that a whirlwind of speaking gigs with 6-figure appearance fees, quiet deals for branded merchandise, and short-lived collaborations that disappeared almost as quickly as they came. Some insiders whispered that a few products were soft-launched, tested, then buried when reception didn't match expectations. Even those were monetized, through data, engagement, or back-end affiliate strategies that never made headlines. And that's the strange part, how easily it all unfolded. Most celebrities spend years cultivating the kind of clout that lands global contracts. Meghan and Harry seem to have them lined up the second they touched down in California. And it didn't stop there. Reports suggested some of those deals were discussed while they were still in the United Kingdom, raising eyebrows over whether stepping back was really just the final stage of a carefully laid plan. But here's what really matters. This wasn't just a string of lucky breaks. It looked like a calculated media empire rollout, one that leveraged the weight of the royal name while publicly claiming to leave it behind. And while they were busy signing checks, a deeper strategy was unfolding. They weren't just selling projects. They were selling the story behind those projects. A story built on pain, exclusion, and identity. Some stories are told to heal, others are told to sell. From the beginning, Meghan and Harry made it clear. Their projects weren't entertainment. They were testimonies. Meghan's podcast promised unfiltered truth. Harry's memoir dove into therapy sessions, trauma, and emotional unraveling. Their Netflix series showed them crying, holding hands, reliving the worst days of their royal fallout. The headlines wrote themselves: racism, betrayal, tabloid abuse, cold family members, mental health struggles. And while those stories undoubtedly held truth, critics began asking, were they being shared for healing or for clicks? Because what followed each tearful confession wasn't quiet reflection. It was a launch, a product, a brand tie-in, a new partnership. Emotional storytelling became the runway for monetized platforms, and every new deal seemed to wrap around a fresh version of the same narrative. They were mistreated, they were misunderstood, and now they were reclaiming the spotlight on their terms. But pain has a price, and eventually, the audience starts to notice when that pain feels like a pitch, and that's exactly what's happening. Even fans began to feel uneasy. One week it's a heartfelt discussion about media cruelty, the next week it's Meghan fronting a lifestyle campaign with luxury branding. The line between vulnerability and strategy blurred beyond recognition. They weren't just telling their story, they were packaging it. And in today's climate, that kind of emotional branding brings serious scrutiny. Because once people believe you're profiting off pain, they don't just stop believing you, they start investigating you. And that's when the questions stopped being emotional and started becoming financial. It wasn't long before the focus shifted from podcasts and paparazzi to something far more serious: paperwork. At first, people thought the criticism was just tabloid noise, but behind the scenes, accountants, financial analysts, and even government insiders started asking sharper questions. Not about what Meghan and Harry were earning, but how that money was moving, where it was going, and whether the story they'd been selling matched the numbers tucked behind legal filings. Reports began to surface, quiet at first, then louder, that financial agencies in both the United Kingdom and the United States were keeping a close eye on the Sussexes' financial empire, not because they were celebrities, but because their sudden spike in wealth didn't align with typical business timelines. Too fast, too global, too tangled. The whispers focused on shell companies, entities created to move funds through different names, often across international borders, offshore accounts, creative tax positioning, multiple layers of financial shielding, none of it proven, but enough smoke to raise questions, enough gaps to justify audits. And here's the problem. When your entire public brand is built on transparency and independence, the second people smell secrecy, the trust erodes. Fast. Because if the money trail leads to islands, blind trusts, or shadow corporations, it's not just about financial risk anymore. It's about perception. And perception, in their case, is currency. But the financial scrutiny didn't stop with their earnings. It crept into the one area where exposure can do even more damage: the line between philanthropy and profit. If there's one thing that can bring down a public figure faster than a tax issue, it's a blurred line between goodwill and gain. Harry and Meghan launched charitable efforts almost immediately after leaving the royal fold. Their foundation, branded as forward-thinking and justice-driven, promised to uplift marginalized voices, protect mental health, and deliver global impact. But as their brand grew, so did the overlap between their personal projects and nonprofit messaging. Wellness ventures launched alongside emotional storytelling. Personal brand moments wrapped themselves around causes. One moment it was a heartfelt documentary on healing, the next a product drop tied to self-care. Meghan's lifestyle brand teases, her rumored product lines, her public commentary, they all sat beside philanthropic headlines. Too close, too often. Insiders began to murmur about potential conflicts of interest. Financial filings were being reviewed, not because anyone had accused them of wrongdoing, but because the overlap raised questions. Were donations being used strictly for charitable work? Were resources ever shared between the nonprofit and the commercial side? Did emotional stories drive up donations right before product launches? And if any part of a charity touched personal revenue, even accidentally, it could mean serious consequences. Experts call this the double exposure zone, where fame and fundraising meet, and transparency becomes non-negotiable. Because you can survive bad press, you can spin a controversy. But if investigators find even a shred of misallocated funds, it stops being PR. It becomes a courtroom problem, fast. And if there's one thing more damaging than financial scrutiny, it's what comes next: overextension. Because Meghan didn't stop at one venture, she launched them all at once. By 2024, it felt like Meghan was everywhere, and in everything. Lifestyle content, cooking show rumors, social media teases, whispered collaborations with high-end fashion houses, talk of a skincare line, then a trademark for teas and jams. All of it rolled out with strategic mystery, always hinting at something coming soon, always paired with sleek photography and media-friendly soundbites. From the outside, it looked like ambition, but to insiders, it looked like overreach. Industry experts started asking, what's the business plan? Where's the backbone beneath all these ventures? Are they passion projects? Or just distractions? Because each launch wasn't just about a new product, it came with emotional framing. Meghan wasn't just creating a face cream, she was healing. She wasn't just branding jam, she was connecting people back to the earth. It all felt beautifully packaged, but dangerously thin. And in business, thin foundations don't hold. That's when brand partners, quietly but noticeably, began pulling back. Some stopped public endorsements. Others, according to chatter from inside PR circles, declined to renew contracts. Why? Reputational risk. When a brand grows too fast, too wide, and too loud, especially one powered by personal trauma, the stability starts to wobble. Investors see the headlines, regulators hear the whispers, consumers start rolling their eyes. And while Meghan was spinning a dozen plates at once, Harry was trying to hold down something far more difficult: credibility. Harry's memoir hit hard. It pulled no punches, naming names, unpacking grief, dragging old family feuds back into the light. It sold millions. But it also split the room. Some called it brave, others called it betrayal. But beyond the headlines, something else was breaking: consistency. Legal teams flagged inconsistencies in timelines. Certain claims were publicly challenged. Key details were questioned. And the palace? Silent. Dead silent. That silence wasn't just a refusal to engage, it was power. Because when the people you accuse say nothing, they don't have to prove you wrong. They let your story unravel on its own. And unravel it did. Commentators noticed shifts in Harry's tone. Interviews once framed as raw started to feel coached. His emotional honesty began to sound rehearsed. Book tour soundbites were clipped, repetitive, tense. Behind the scenes, legal advisors were reportedly bracing for fallout. Not because of what Harry said, but because of how he said it. If any part of the memoir was found to stretch the truth, even slightly, it could affect everything, from credibility in courtrooms to enforceable clauses in brand partnerships. And now, with tax authorities circling and financial agents mapping out the inner structure of the Sussex empire, Harry's words are no longer just judged in public opinion. They're being measured against legal frameworks. If a single claim doesn't hold up, the entire narrative starts to crack. But what happens when that narrative is no longer just emotional, but financial? In the world of media, perception is everything, until the paperwork arrives. Behind the camera flashes, the filtered documentaries, and the curated podcast quotes, something more sobering has been unfolding. Documentation. Legal experts say the chatter isn't just speculative anymore, it's procedural. Insiders claim multiple agencies, both tax and regulatory, have already begun tracing Meghan and Harry's income streams across countries, platforms, and shell corporations. The goal isn't just to tally the revenue, it's to test the truth. Were the business entities structured legally? Were donations filed properly? Were taxes paid in full across every jurisdiction? And most importantly, did the stories told in interviews match the financial records buried in spreadsheets? Because here's the thing. Public statements are one thing, bank accounts are another, and when those two don't align, subpoenas follow. Lawyers reportedly are preparing for every possible outcome: public filings, testimony requests, document disclosure. If even one nonprofit dollar was routed toward a private brand, it could trigger investigation across international lines. And at that point, no PR strategy in the world can spin it back. Because in a courtroom, it's not about trauma, it's not about intention, it's about signatures, receipts, and timestamps. And the paper trail doesn't care about editing, emotion, or audience loyalty. It just points. If the Sussex empire was built on transparency, this is the ultimate audit. And the numbers won't just confirm the story, they'll expose the real one. And that brings us to the question no one in the media dares ask out loud. But the legal world is already whispering, was this ever about healing? Or was it about hiding? Every new venture feels more like a panic pivot than a power move. Meghan's once polished media moments now look rushed. The rollout strategies, scattershot, the interviews, clipped, awkward, oddly rehearsed. Harry's public appearances have become less frequent, and when he does speak, the energy feels off. Not confident, defensive, even their once reliable media allies have started to pull back. Quiet omissions in articles, fewer glowing op-eds. Brands they once boosted now remain silent when controversy hits. That's not coincidence, it's exit strategy. The problem isn't fame fatigue, it's revenue pressure. When every new project is tied to a profit expectation, the stakes rise. When you monetize your entire life, you have to keep producing moments. Relevance becomes rent, and right now, they're burning through capital, financial, reputational, and emotional, at a speed that's hard to sustain. That's why legal circles are watching them like a startup on the verge of collapse. Overexposed, over-leveraged, too many launches, not enough stability. Behind closed doors, some insiders even wonder if the Sussex empire is racing ahead not because it's winning, but because it's trying to outrun something bigger. Tax audits, financial questions, misuse of charitable branding, public contradictions, too many cracks, not enough time to patch them. And when the moment hits, when the next subpoena lands, or a financial filing gets pulled into public view, it won't just be a reputation collapse, it'll be a reckoning.